as you can see, I'm trying to improve the average age of the session. Thank you. And maybe some of you don't know INRIA, the French National Research Center for Computer Science. Okay, scikit-learn, for instance. And the aim of Regalia is to build algorithms to audit algorithms. And I will try to explain why and how. Most of you were not there, but I was already coding poorly in C++. I don't remember this kind of language, I imagine. We were doing workforce management software for call centers. This is the equivalent of 911 in France. And at some point, at the end, I think it was late in the day, a guy called me. He had an issue with the unions of those guys, saying that agents at the end of the alphabet, like Rottembourg, at the end of the alphabet, had very poor shifts compared to guys at the top of the alphabet, like Annalisa. And it was a scandal. I just bluntly answered, it's not possible. I've not the names. I'm not guilty. But I dig a little bit into it, and the agent ID that I was receiving to build my algorithms was ranked in alphabetical order that I didn't know. And I, without knowing it, in the little loops of my algorithm, I was giving the hardest shift at the end of my loop to the end of the alphabet. So it was a simple example of a non-guilty guy doing very poor stuff. More seriously, Deliveroo had the very great idea of using sick leave days in the evaluation of the riders and was sentenced in Italy for discrimination. They were guilty. And you have very intermediate situation where you almost use an almost sensitive variable and build side effects that discriminate between two populations. And it's massive. 40% of the commercial websites in Europe tested by the anti-fraud authorities have some issues about unfairness, manipulation, dark patterns, and stuff like this. So probably 40% of you contribute to this situation, statistically. It might be very small, but it might be super big. For instance, the European Commission is seriously looking at Amazon buy box. Are you sure that the best buy box choice that you pick up when you buy is fair? So they are trying to have the answer. So the law evolves. Don't look at that, but just to understand that regulation authorities are trying to muscle up, if I can say that, and try to hire data scientists and look into Booking.com, into Spotify, into, name it, Google, Amazon, etc., to trying to detect bias, disloyalties, sometimes fraud, or anti-competitive practices. Just to take the last one, in July 2023, the city of New York, so it's not small, just regulates employers using AI in hiring and evaluation processes. They have to check their bias, and they have to say, in average, we hire this kind of people compared to this kind of people. So I don't know if we will have more female coders, but let's try to check what we are doing. So who is guilty? Is it just a perception of the society? Are we getting allergic to bias? Or is it something a bit deeper? Probably A/B testing, it doesn't help. In my boomer days, we were over-specifying algorithms. HR, unions, etc. So before the first line of code, there was at least 6 months of discussion around the table. And what if, and if the guy arrives at 8, will he lunch at 12 or not, or can we, etc., etc., etc. Long discussions. It's not the case. Now you have the next sprint, and that's all. And probably the chain of subcontractors that goes in the end into India or Pakistan, I don't know, doesn't help. Someone in Pakistan wouldn't know that someone reading Marie Claire, French newspaper, is probably a female, statistically. So how can he know? So now that I think, now that the situation is so massive, how do we put in place auditing mechanisms? How does it work? How can we do it? Can we just open the hood and read the code? No one of you who has a few lines of code would dare to do that, even your own code a few years ago. There are ways, there are different approaches, but there are ways in behavioral testing. So you have a black box, and you bombard the black box with requests. And you try to check if female, male, black, white, etc., old, young, etc., have an effect on the answers. But you have many conditions to meet to be able to do it in a proper way to go in justice at some point. It's quite delicate. You have to be frugal. Suppose you bombard Booking.com in Copenhagen next week, but you don't buy. You just ask questions. The feeling that Booking.com or the algorithm of Booking.com will have is that, oh, the price is too expensive. I have to put down the price. So you cannot bombard. You are harming the platform if you bombard it in a wrong way. So there are many conditions, and at some point you don't want to check everything. You want to find a prejudice situation, and it's often very local. Female, 50-ish, black, curvy, etc. It's always local in the end for business reasons. And you try to find a flagrant offense to put into discussion with the platform. So there are ways to build what we call good surrogate, a clone. We clone the black box in a minimal way so that there is no way to make a difference between the clone and the black box. And then you try to explain how the surrogate works. So this is a very large philosophy, and it's an open topic of research. Just to give you an idea, is it the same as finding a gold coin with metal detector and a battery, a limited battery? Or is it more a battleship game? Knowing that probably female, then I can avoid this part of the landscape. The landscape is 200 variables times the space of the variables, of course. Well, very boomer, I'm sorry. Once you have detected a bias, what do you do? Some banks I've met are just plugging out the sensitive data. Not only it's very rough, but it's not enough. There might be variables correlated with the sensitive variables. So you have to put out every guilty-ish variable. It's not enough. And by the way, it might be very excessive. Another way to do that, just take it roughly, you have a female, and the sensitive variable is female. Take all the males looking like the female, look at the average decision on the males, and apply it to the female. It's another approach. And you can prove that there are optimal approaches to minimally repair an algorithm. So that's what I wanted to tell you. There is some hope. We can put a skin around our algorithms when they are unfair, or in the algorithm, we can regularize with regard to the side effects we have observed. That will be all for me today. We developers are not necessarily the guilty ones, but not taking care with all the skills we have, with all the data we have, not taking care is being guilty. Please take care.
Thank you very much. We can go here on the left part of the screen. Thank you very much for your talk. there is something that started to make me think about our role as a developer. So as you said, with all the skills we have, we should step up and try to to avoid making bad things or evil things in a way. Very hard question. How do you think we should act as developers which don't actually own the product they are coding? So sometimes, or at least the business metrics are leading towards a technical choice, but what we can do as a developers to avoid this?
I think it's clearly a product owner constraints that has to be added. Every time I produce something, I produce, like you do, quality tests, or what we call in the old days regression tests.
Yes.
It's a form of regression tests that we have, which is, they are the metrics we have. We are obsessed with optimizing something, and you introduce counter metrics as far as you discover them. So there might be official counter metrics, female, age, blah, blah. We have 25 sensitive variable in France, for your information. So you have 25 counter metrics. And so typically, I think it has to be introduced. But you need someone else in the company not involved in the product development, a form of auditor or compliance officer, like banks are doing, by the way. They are not doing for the pleasure, obliged to do it. So probably we have to put a kind of external point of view just to challenge a little bit. Have you thought about this? Can we see that? Is there a data drift? Yes. Because the problem might not be at the beginning of the application.
Yeah, sure. We have interesting questions already from the Q&A. How do you evaluate the boundary between legitimate user-based segmentation and discrimination?
Well, I've been doing pricing for 20 years. There is no pricing without discrimination. So that's cool. So saying that at the beginning, on a Friday afternoon, a guy who is buying a ticket is more in a hurry. So you can a little bit increase the price on a Friday afternoon. This is some form of discrimination. What you don't have to do is probably, and there is bias in the history of the data. There is bias. Society is biased. Probably a definition of what is fair to me is don't do worse than what you find when you arrive in the data set. So if your algorithm is increasing the bias compared to the data you receive, probably you go in the wrong direction. It's a counterfactual way of not doing dirty stuff. But it's vicious to know where.
The way I understand it, it's not only at some point you might make a mistake where you don't understand how you're integrating some data that shouldn't be there.
Yeah.
And the question that I have is that with the growing use of AI with people, for example, with Apple SDK, we can use AI without being an expert in AI. Isn't there a risk that people will use technologies they don't master to the point they are not reliable, but also in the end they are, but because they are the only one working on it?
Yeah, I think clearly it's a risk that if you don't really know the unbalance or some side effects of what you use, you might go very fast and probably go in the wrong direction. But it's speaking about honest people, but there are guys also who are cheating. Some, and I can say it, some insurance companies, during their hiring process for a data scientist, they ask for a way to circumvent female versus male information. So I think there is also a culture, which is, no, there are things you cannot do.
A very pragmatic question, but interesting. Can you give us some example of the 24 variables you were mentioning about segmentation?
Yeah, so I think age is obvious, but being pregnant, for instance, and it's quite easy to detect, fortunately. Religion, or let's say monotheism, is something super easy to detect. The way you buy food 1 week before Ramadan, I think everyone knows. Okay, by the way, your neighbors know, etc., etc. So religion. You have also some income, I think, some situation, etc. So you can see it, défenseur des droits in France, and you will see the 25 rules. So it's not only the variable; it's situation where you are not allowed to use those variables. So think about, and don't think only about the variables, but correlated variables, like reading Marie Claire. Maybe it's not exactly being a female, but I can tell you that it's very close. Yeah. And it's good enough. We love the good enough. Okay? It's good enough to know the gender, etc., etc.
Yeah.
There's one question that seems really interesting to me. What, as a developer, when you're not in charge of designing the features, when you're asked to do something and you're like, okay, this is going to be a problem,
yeah.
What are your options and who should you talk to?
Yeah. So in good companies, you have alert, I don't know how they call it, whistleblower, somewhere. So I had this situation in a very big company where I saw form of fraud. I went to the guy and we fixed the problem, by the way. So, but there are companies that have probably a poor way to look at it. Here, I think it's a choice you make. It's like for green washing or for etc. It's your own responsibility in the end. If you are confronted to situation like this a lot, and it's at the core of your business, like building, I don't know, making cigarettes. I mean, it's difficult to say to you save humanity making cigarettes, for instance. I think it's a bit the same. Some companies are deeply engraved into manipulating customer data.
Specifically, yeah.
Okay, but if your company is not willing to fix the problem once you've raised it, is there like, I don't know, NGO or governmental organization?
Yeah, there are. You can, there are websites when you can say that you have encountered this situation. La répression des fraudes, DGCCRF in France. You can anonymously say something. CNIL, the same. Yeah. Well, it's not very clean, but this is a way to solve.
Specifically about our ecosystem, which is well, mainly iOS apps or macOS apps, there is one more actor than in traditional environments, which is basically app stores. So Apple, yeah. Play Store. What role should they play, in your opinion, in this part?
I think there are two levels. The App Store itself might favor some kinds of app versus other apps. So is this neutral? And I think it has been discussed. So it's one thing. The second thing is the data you use in the app. And I would say on this side, probably Apple is probably better than other GAFAM. But you have to check your own data. It might be subtle. I give an example. Face recognition. Bias in face recognition, you think, black, white, obese, not obese, etc. There are very subtle stuff, like the age of your iPhone. If you have an old Android or an old iPhone, the quality of the image is so poor that the face recognition is not easy. So here, poor guys are wrongly detected by the application. So you really have to imagine what could be the side effects. And here, there are lots of apps now that you have to check. You take a kind of selfie, or you say 3 words, and then you can enter the application. It might not be neutral.
Yeah, very interesting. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed.